Hi folks, good evening. I just have to lit this because there's so many mosquitoes around me here and I'm gonna be eaten if I don't, so forgive me. I just drew out here after I finished cleaning up at the graveyard where my parents is. Not that I'm religious about where they are or not are, because they're in my heart and their legacy lives on in me, so that pretty much sums that up. But you know, when you have a place where they are, you need to keep it clean. At least that's the rules in Denmark. So I went out there and did what was supposed to be done. And then I started thinking. It's like 10 years ago since my father passed away, and 8 years ago. 8 years ago since my dad passed away, and 5 years ago since my mom passed away. So they pretty much have been free of what's happening now in the world. But I started thinking, what would they say today if they were around? How would they find the world? It's not that it's not that so many things has happened in 5 years, or is it? Uh, a little bit about my parents. My father was the youngest of 12. He was um, from a family where they all had to have an education, if possible. They were 10 boys. 2 of them passed away before they reached the age of school, and they were twins, just like my father was twins. So my grandparents had a lot of kids. But well, 8 out of them were 7 of them were boys and 3 girls. And the one girl also had an education as a midwife because her husband passed away, and then my grandfather stepped up and said, you can't support yourself and a kid with no education, and so all of you boys who have your education, you start spitting in and help her get the education, and we'll take the granddaughter till she finished her education. So that pretty much sums up what a great guy my grandfather was. Um, and my mother also came from a hard-working family. Well, first of all, my father's father was running chart wagons uh, that carried cement and stuff like that, clay, very hard work. They had to run these wagons like 2-3 miles only with human force. But enough about that. He broke his back and he still came back to work. I think 6 months later. He was a very 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 strong person. Um, and then later he opened up his own bakery shop and had a dairy place too. So yeah, he knew how to make bread and put bread and milk on the tables of his kids. My mother's father, also a very hard-working person. And the funny thing about my mother, her cousin, was in the Danish concentration camp. And no, we were not Jewish. Well, we are not Jewish. But he had been flirting with some ideas coming from the Soviet Union, and when he came back, he survived because in the Danish concentration camp, it wasn't a killing camp like we know them from Germany, but it was hard, very hard. But when he came back, he formed the Danish Communist Party, so that's pretty much sums up where my roots are. we never heard much about it as kids, but when we grew up, we started figuring out a lot of stuff, especially from my father's siblings. Um, they all uh, were very active in the years 40 to 45. And yeah, I don't need to tell you what happened in Europe around that time, do I? No. But they all did what was good for and possible. They ran with the newspapers from the Resistens and stuff like that. And a couple of the elders was in Copenhagen by then. As soon as this goes out, the mosquitoes attacks. But anyways, when I started hearing about what they did and not did and stuff like that, and I remember the first time I heard about it, I was 9 years old. Got my first knife, which was an inherited knife for my scout. And I noticed that it had some very dark spots on the leather and the handle, and I did ask my mom, why, what's that? And she said, well, this knife belonged to one of your uncles, and he was out one night in 43, and he had to use it, and then she didn't really tell me much more. And first later, when I grew up, I realized that it was blood. But they never spoke about it because it wasn't something that you went around talking about. It was just something that you had to do, and you did it. I remember that that I wanted to have lived in that time to fight for my country and to be joining the resistance and some stuff like that. But again, I've grown wiser, because as things are now, I might have to face it. And it's not fun. It's really not funny. But even if I have to lay down my life in this fight, I will do it. And some of you will say, well, really? And others who knows me will say, yeah, we have no doubt that you will do it. But what I wonder is that how did it all end up like this? What happened? And this is hard stuff, because when I look back when I was a kid, I started in school when the European Union started, or back then it was called the Fellowship of Europa. And it was supposed to just be about trading over the borders and stuff like that. So, but even back then, I remember hearing my dad saying, I don't like the idea, it's not good for us. And he was in a company that actually lived by trading. And well, he was a wise man. He had seen stuff, and he kind of also looked ahead and said, if this is getting too much ahead, we might face something that we can't handle. It wasn't only the idea of Germany and France, it was the whole idea about who will be in charge of everything. And yeah, he seems to have been right. And ever since I was grown enough, I started to actually also go against the United Nation of Europe, because I've seen it. I know history, and I've seen that things are thickening it's a plot. And I will have to make a part 2 of this video. So I will just say this was part 1, and I will make part 2 in a little while. I have to find a place without mosquitoes now.